Very warm welcome, everybody. My name is Patricia Surita. I'm the Chief Executive of BirdLife International, and we are delighted to have so many of you joining us to talk about such an important topic. How do we save the vultures of Africa, and the work that BirdLife has been doing with vultures in the old world for quite some time. We have an absolute stellar panel that is going to be enlightening us through their work on the ground and our science. So I'm delighted to introduce Roger Safford, the Program Coordinator of the Preventing Extinctions Program of BirdLife International. Roger is going to tell us a little bit about the work that BirdLife does with vultures. But right after him, we will have Fadzai Matsvimbo, the Preventing Extinctions Program Manager of BirdLife Zimbabwe, where she's going to be able to tell us a lot more about what's happening on the ground. And we'll close with Joseph Onoja, from the Director of Technical Programs of BirdLife in Nigeria, the Nigerian Conservation Foundation. So just another reminder, as Sarah said, if you have questions, please use the Q&A box. We will be monitoring them and checking and passing that on to the speakers so we can resolve them. But without further ado, I leave you with our stellar panel. One more thing before I forget, we also have online my dear friend Kariuki Nganga from the BirdLife Kenya office, and who is the lead of the conservation program for our Africa team. So Kariuki is going to be helping us with some of the questions as well. So feel free to post them on the Q&A box. And without further ado, let me pass it on to you, Roger.
Thank you very much, and welcome everybody. My name is Roger Safford, and I'm here to tell you about our program on African vultures. And our story really began in 2015 in the current phase, where it became clear that there had been some disastrous declines in vultures, and these birds, which used to be so widespread and familiar to many people in Africa, were really in danger of becoming extinct. So this is mainly about Africa. However, we have been working on Asian and European vultures for longer, and there have been some remarkable successes there, which have been a guide and an inspiration for us. So I will be touching on those as well. So we begin with a quick tour of the diversity of vultures we have in Africa and Eurasia. Perhaps more species than many people realize, 16 of them. They occur all the way across the old world, from tropical Southeast Asia all the way across Africa and into Southern Europe. Now what you notice here, these little icons next to some of them, little ominous orange and red icons, these are the red list status, which means it's a measure of the risk of extinction. Critically endangered, well, I think you can guess this is the worst situation a species can be in before it goes extinct. It means there's a very high probability this will happen. And endangered is the next stop down. So a pretty shocking 11 out of 16 of these vultures across the Africa and Eurasia are in these top two categories of threat. And so this is something that clearly needs a bit of action. So going into a little bit more detail about the problems in Africa. Now let me explain this graph to you. This is comparing how vultures are doing with how the rest of the world's birds are doing. And it's a plot of what's called the red list index over time. So this index is a measure of the sort of average level of threat across a whole group of species, and how it's you can plot it against time to see how it's changed. So the yellow line is all the world's birds. Now it's going down, the scale doesn't show that easily. If everything was fine, nothing was threatened, it would be 1. And if everything was extinct, it would be 0. So all the world's birds, they are declining. They are gradually decreasing. Vultures, on the other hand, are crashing. So they started off back in the 1980s already worse than the rest of the world's birds, but they have been declining very rapidly ever since. And then we seem to have a sound problem. Okay, I will carry on. I think we've resolved it. So my point here is that the African vultures are very much worse off than most of the rest of the birds of the world. And in fact, as a group, they are probably the most threatened group of species of this sort of scale in the world. Now, why should that be? Well, vultures being large birds, you quite often actually are able to find the corpses when they die and work out why this happened. And we find that the main reason is poisoning. It happens for two main drivers. One is quite unintentional as far as the humans and the vultures are concerned. This is where often livestock herders are losing their flocks to carnivores, lions, hyenas, this kind of thing. And they put out poison to kill the carnivores, which may or may not work as far as they're concerned. But what certainly happens is that large numbers of vultures will end up taking the poisoned meat and are killed in dozens or even hundreds. And then the other way that vultures get poisoned are by ivory poachers. So ivory poachers don't like vultures, because vultures draw attention to what they're doing. And so a common practice of ivory poachers is after they've killed their elephant, it's a dreadful business, they lace the carcass of the elephant or perhaps another baited animal next to it with poison in order to kill the vultures so that they will not draw attention to them for next time. And we've had incidents of over 500 vultures killed in one poisoning incident. Now, the other main uses, main causes of decline of the vultures, we call it belief-based use, and this is the use of body parts in well, what used to be called sometimes called traditional medicine, but various uses for body parts in various parts of the world, particularly in parts of Western Southern Africa. And this actually is often done by poison, but not only that. Vultures may also be killed on electricity infrastructure, both pylons, power lines, and wind farms. And they may be electrocuted or they may crash into them. And quite large numbers may be killed in particular areas. So those are the main problems. There are others. They are sometimes hunted. Their habitat may be lost. They may lose food. But that accounts for most of the difficulties we have. So why does it matter? Well, I think for many of us concerned with conservation, they matter because they're there and they're fascinating and they are in trouble. But they also matter for another reason. They are fantastically useful species. I mean, the picture at the top here shows a familiar pattern that you may have seen of vultures cleaning up a carcass. This is what they do better than anything else. That's not an exaggeration. There is nothing that cleans up a carcass more cleanly and quickly than a vulture. And without vultures, the scene at the bottom is more likely the outcome, where you have a whole range of opportunistic scavengers, dogs, and so on. And the difference has been worked out pretty well, and it's shown that with vultures around, the carcasses get cleaned up enormously quicker and more comprehensively. And so these dogs and so on may be passing diseases among each other, and who knows where they may end up next. So this is a problem when vultures disappear. So they're useful and they're declining, and we should care. But sadly, there is, of course, a stereotype of the vulture as something profiting from disaster and death. And as you see, this cartoon's a sad example. And clearly, as you can see from the background, it's a recent example. It's a pity to see this kind of imagery, but there it is. So can we save vultures? They're not easy birds to work with necessarily, but there has been a crisis for vultures in Asia, and the evidence there is that we can save vultures. There was a crisis in South Asia where 99% or more of the vultures of South Asia, that's the Indian subcontinent, disappeared over about a 10 to 15 year period, and mainly through the 90s into this century. And it was discovered that the cause of this was unintentional poisoning from another cause. It was a veterinary drug. It was veterinary diclofenac, an anti-inflammatory. And when vultures ate a carcass of an animal that had been treated shortly before it died, the vultures too died in huge numbers. And this was a very widely used medicine in veterinary use. The governments responded very quickly from the advocacy from conservation organizations, including BirdLife, to ban veterinary diclofenac. And a consortium of conservation organizations, it's the logo you have on the left of your picture here, called SAVE, Saving Asia's Vultures from Extinction, was created to try to make sure that this ban was fully enacted and the diclofenac was removed from the ecosystem. And they set up captive breeding facilities to make, just in case the worst should happen in the wild, while working on in situ conservation, in other words, measures to protect the habitat and make it safe for vultures so that the populations could recover. And finally, that's what they're doing. We've had some places where they've actually been increases in population, others where they've stabilized or appear to have done. Sadly, a few places where they're still declining, but clearly we can do this. It takes time, but we can do it, and we can do it in Africa too. So how do we do it? Well, it begins, you figure out what you know and what you need to know, and you fill the gaps, and then you make plans. And then, particularly within birds with an image problem like vultures, you need to do some awareness raising and about their importance, and there may be some laws that need to be looked at to back this up. And then you've got to get boots on the ground, because these things, these laws and so on do not implement themselves, of course. So we deal with the poisoning, we deal with the belief-based use of the body parts, and we set up vulture safe zones and so on. So what does knowledge what sort of knowledge do we need? Well, there's a couple of examples here. This is a vulture with a satellite transmitter. So these things, they put a transmitter on them which broadcasts regularly exactly where the bird is, and you can follow their extraordinary movements spanning vast areas across many, many countries, which also tells us the scale of the problem, which means that you might solve a threat in one area, but the bird may be poisoned in another. So the need for international work. And then the other map is showing the areas of highest risk from this, what we call the belief-based use, particularly centered in parts of West Africa and Southern Africa. So we know where to focus our efforts. And then we put this knowledge into plans, because we have to get people working together on this kind of work. It's crosses international borders, and many different sectors can get involved. So we have a grand plan covering all the range of all the vultures of Africa and Eurasia. And then we have the very first national plan for an African country in Zimbabwe, and our next speaker was actually very much involved in the production of that. And we need this because we need actions in every country coordinated. We spread the word. So here is an article in the Huffington Post, very, very well known, mainly online newspaper, explaining about the problem and why it matters, and people like National Geographic are picking up on it too. You can read some great articles in National Geographic. And then at the local level, there are quite different approaches. The same message, but a different style. And this is a dance group and a vulture support group, as it calls itself, called the Buffalo Dancers in Kenya, and they are spreading the word among communities in Kenya. So back to the ground, and stopping that poisoning. It's a difficult business, and I hope this picture shows the sort of the range of people that you need to get together, many different logos there, many different organizations taking part. And you can respond to poison. When the poison's gone down, all is not yet lost. You can make the poison safe, and you can also collect evidence to catch the people who did it if they're breaking the law, which generally poisoning is strictly illegal, of course. That is what this type of work has been achieving. And you can work out sort of protocols for the response that people need to make, so long as there is awareness in the first place of the problems. So equally, and you can try to convince people that poisoning is not the way to solve problems of livestock herders, and there are other ways to protect your herds that don't do so much damage. And there's crime scene training as well, as happens with many wildlife crime issues. So particular efforts in Kenya and Botswana and Zimbabwe on this. And we also have a very useful and very productive partnership with some other organizations under a banner called Restore Species, working together to solve some of these poisoning problems. And this is the kind of thing that's going on in national parks and protected areas all across Africa. Coming up with these protocols like you have on the bottom right, the Kenyan government has actually adopted a protocol for responding to poisoning incidents to help vultures. And the poison there, this blue crystals, is one of the most notorious ones. Recording the information about where the poisonings have happened, so you know where to focus your efforts. Keeping the awareness raising, increasing all the time. And these things can work. I mean, the indications from the first project we've done in Kenya appears to have shown a 30% decrease in vulture deaths from poisoning, and we need to maintain that and increase it. And the training is getting to a wide number of people, enforcement officers and rangers in parks and so on. So talking of which, though, it's one thing to deal with working with livestock herders and to help them to find other ways to protect their herds. But ivory poaching is a very different business. And this is where we need some big, strong collaborations, and we need to find common cause with lion and elephant conservationists, elephant in particular, of course, in the case of the ivory. And so we've teamed up with a partnership called Project Ranger. And this will help us to redouble our efforts to deal with the what they call sentinel poisoning, because the vultures are the sentinels that draw attention to the poachers. You can read about this online. If you Google the name, you'll find some more information and videos about it. So putting it all together then, I'm going to hand over in a moment to Fadzai, who's going to tell you a bit about what we're calling vulture safe zones. So the point here we're making is that protected areas are not generally big enough to save vultures on their own, and laws are difficult to enforce. And to give vultures the safe places they need, we need to work more with owners and managers of big tracts of lands, ranches, and so on. And they're ready to help. They'd be delighted to help, and we need to make that work. It's a good way to go. It's not constantly harping on about prohibition. It's not negative. It's about good, sound environmental practices to encourage vultures, to make areas safe for vultures. And it brings benefits in terms of reputation and economics to the people, to the land managers and owners who do it. It's been tested in Asia, and it's working to remove the diclofenac veterinary threat. So let's do it in Africa. There are more threats there, but the principle can be the same. So I'm now going to hand over to Fadzai, who is going to tell you a little bit about this, how this is working in Zimbabwe.
Thank you, Roger. In Zimbabwe, one of the novel approaches we've been now taking in terms of responding to the vulture threat in Africa has been the introduction of vulture safe zones. This is something that we have started in the last 1.5 years. We've also been engaged in various other actions. but the introduction of vulture safe zones is something that is novel to us, that we've just been working on. In the implementation of vulture safe zones, we are looking at appropriately sized geographic pieces of land where we put in targeted conservation measures. In this space, what we're looking at is really particularly reducing the key threats to vultures. In most cases, this is usually responding to issues around poisoning, responding to issues around harvesting for belief-based use, and also even protecting the breeding areas. It is also understanding what is the status in those areas, what is the size of the breeding population, how much areas or what is the size of the habitat that is available to vultures. All this is we're getting scientific information to back our responses and our interventions. So that's why we really collect this data, especially on the sizes of the populations, particularly breeding populations in these areas. The vulture safe zone work, we're really looking at an investment that spans over 10 years because, you know, of the time that it takes for vulture populations to recover. So we're not looking at spending less than 10 years when we start engaging in vulture safe zones. So that just speaks to the level of commitment that we have to put in once we start engaging stakeholders on the ground, approaching them with this novel approach. What brings it all together to make it all work is the willingness of landowners and stakeholders. Because in most areas, we are working outside of the protected area system, and we are much dependent on the landowners' willingness to be part of this approach, to be saving vultures for the future. We are currently working in two areas. One, in the southeast part of the country, Safford Valley Conservancy, started off at Sango Ranch, and also in western Zimbabwe, in the Gwai area. And then we're also potentially looking at a transboundary vulture safe zone together with our neighboring countries, Botswana and South Africa. The reason for going into transboundary vulture safe zones is also, again, looking at securing a larger space for vultures, looking at the kinds of ranges that they cover, especially on the African continent, hence the need to have much wider areas incorporated into the vulture safe zones. We usually start off by doing assessments, and this entails understanding the land practices that are happening in those areas and helping us also in a way to make recommendations on the best way to have vulture-friendly practices. So definitely understanding those practices is how we do that, is through the vulture safe zone assessments. Updating vulture breeding baseline data, again, another key aspect of the work that we do in these vulture safe zones. Again, it also helps us to delineate the extent of the vulture safe zones. Quite a number of times, the key area is really to protect the breeding population. And since we have started in 2019, we have capacitated more than 40 field staff or rangers, you know, the people on the ground who are first to be responding to either poisoning incidences, the people who are on an everyday basis, watching what is happening in the environment, collecting, monitoring data. So we've had trainings where we've shared with them what to monitor, how to monitor, what information is useful, not just for us, but also for the land owners and for the managers. And what we've been getting is a huge interest by all these different stakeholders in this novel approach, from the landowners to the managers to the rangers. We're really getting a really spark in terms of the interest in vulture conservation. And it does bring positive branding to to the participating ranches or farms, because we are really talking about a positive storyline where we are saying these are the people who are committing themselves to saving a species from disappearing from this earth. These are the people who are contributing to halting vulture declines. So quite a positive storyline, as well as positive branding for those properties, and contribution to the Zimbabwe Vulture Action Plan, the first one in Africa, and which covers important aspects regarding poisoning, raising awareness, as well as making sure that the infrastructure in around areas where vultures breed and feed is safe for vultures, as well as research and monitoring. So that again is a contribution to the whole aspect of the vulture safe zones. We do expect that we may also have other areas in the future that will also encompass into this vulture safe zone concept, given the positive responses that we're getting. And we should be able in a few months to be also giving feedback of how much other efforts that have gone on in these areas in terms of the impact on vulture conservation in Zimbabwe and also in the region as well. I'll stop now and hand over to the next presenter, Joseph. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Fadzai, for that talk on Zimbabwe. And now I'll be talking about combating belief-based use in Nigeria. But before I go into that, I want to bring our attention to the situation that happened in Guinea-Bissau at the beginning of this year. We had a situation where vultures were living their normal lives. And all of a sudden, we had a catastrophe where over 2,000 vultures were killed. And when the situation was dug into, it was realized that it was because of poisoning. And that situation is not far-fetched from what is happening across the West African sub-region, because we've been involved in vulture advocacy since 2015 through grants that we got from the BirdLife family, and we're able to do market surveys where we found out that vultures had been killed in their numbers through poisoning and also through different methods of capture. But what really caught our attention is the fact that this is a trade that is expanding and it's ongoing. And sometimes we even have situations where vulture parts were brought in from other countries. We had situations where vulture parts were brought in from neighboring countries like Niger, like Burkina Faso, even Benin Republic. So when we heard about the situation of the vultures in Guinea-Bissau, it was quite a disturbing one. And that painted what is actually happening. And when we did that, we found out that, well, vultures are being used, number one, for belief-based use, which Roger rightly pointed out as a common use, commonly called as for medicine. And they use it for rituals to get rich. They use it for rituals, for charms to get lucky. And they use it also to prevent evil from happening to them. And we've also found out that they use them also, the method by which they capture them. They use live baits. Sometimes they want to get them alive, because we found out that a whole vulture is about 30,000 naira, which if you convert it to dollars is about going to maybe $80-90 per vulture. And the head of the vulture alone is about $50. So that drove them to want to get them alive. And sometimes they get them dead by poisoning them, so they'll be able to get it, just like the situation in Guinea-Bissau. And what we did to be able to counter some of these things in Nigeria through the help of the US Fish and Wildlife grants that we got, and also the EV Life project of the EU, we were able to engage law enforcement agencies to train them. Number one, we found out that they didn't have the capacity to identify even vulture parts. So we had to train them to be able to know that these things are against the law. And apart from being against the law, it's also detrimental to the ecosystem functioning of the vultures. So we need to train them on that. We also engaged the hunters, we engaged the medicine men, so that we'll be able to understand why they use vultures and what alternatives there could be. So in engaging them, we're able to come up with the fact that there are plant-based alternatives that we could use. So far, we've identified 3 plants that can be used. And we are also doing that in such a way that we will not jeopardize even those plants. And luckily for us, those plants are locally available and they are easily propagated. So with the help of these medicine men, we are able to get those alternatives. And then we want to upscale this project so that the regions that we are working with currently will be able to upscale it to other parts of the country, and if possible, other parts of West Africa, so that people will stop using vulture parts or the vultures themselves for belief-based use. So I think I will stop here, and thank you very much for listening. I'll now hand over to Sarah.
Hello, everybody. I'll just briefly talk about our appeal, which launched just yesterday, which some of you may already have seen, before we move into the questions and answers. So we launched our appeal yesterday to find support for our vulture programme. As hopefully you've learned today from our presentation, we know the problems that the vultures are facing, and we know how we can help, but we really need support to be able to do this. So we launched our appeal yesterday, and we've already got over £2,000. Thank you very much to those of you who have already donated. We've, thanks to a very gracious donor, we've got $10,000 that we can use for match funding for the start of this appeal. So that means for the first $10,000, we are able to double your donation, which makes a huge difference. So if you donate £30 to us, we can turn that into 60. So that's obviously extra fantastic for the vulture appeal. So I would ask any of you to please consider if you really care about the plight of vultures and you would like to help. You can see the link hopefully on your screen at the bottom, but if you can't make a note of that now, don't worry, we'll be sharing this slide again at the end of the webinar, and you'll also have the opportunity of being redirected to it when you leave the webinar today. So let me just stop sharing that now, and we've got some great questions coming in from you. A little reminder that if you have a question you'd like to answer, to please use the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and then we can answer as many as we can before the end of the session. So I'll leave it up to the team to decide who wants to answer this one, but we had a question come in from Pat Quinn. Thank you, Pat, which was, what about captive breeding as a booster, like what was done with the Californian condor?
I could take a shot at that one. Thank you for the question. So captive breeding, first of all, it's possible. It is technically possible. It has been done for some time, and in fact, when the Asian vultures were declining really catastrophically. I mean, in the white-rumped vulture in the Indian subcontinent had a population of around 40 million, of which 99.9% were killed, presumably largely by this unfortunate use of the veterinary drug. Now, at that time, then, birds were taken into captivity in case the unthinkable should happen and that they were to go extinct in the wild. So it can be done. It is expensive. It's a tricky business to keep vultures just because of the sheer volumes of meat that they need to eat. And of course, if you have a problem of contamination of the meat, it becomes even more difficult because you have to make sure that their supply is is safe for them to eat. So it can be done. It's expensive, but it's available to us should we need to do it. And most of the species are established in captivity somewhere, so there is a head start if it's needed. But we do hope that we can keep them going in the wild in the first place. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Roger. We've also got a question here from George Ledeck, who says, does BirdLife have simple guidelines for power pole dimensions and configurations so that African power utilities would easily know how to procure power transmission and distribution lines that are raptor friendly?
I can go for that. So we have guidelines which are not necessarily specific to the dimension of the poles, but we have guidelines regarding placement of our infrastructure for power lines, as well as some of the things that can be done to mitigate the effects of power lines and other infrastructure on vultures. So those ones can be built and be available on our website.
Thank you very much, Kerry Kittens. And sort of related to that, we've had a question come in which says, what could be the possible ways to mitigate the collision risk of vultures with towers and transmission lines and aeroplanes, etc.?
So on the same line, so I think maybe I'll just mention a few of them. So at an initial stage, one of them is how the various infrastructure are placed. They need to be sited at places which are not hotspots for the vultures and other birds. So there's, of course, considerations of guidelines of where to place those infrastructure so that to avoid those locations which are either being used when they are moving from one place to another, or where they are possibly nesting or roosting. Then there's the issue of when they have been placed already and you want to mitigate that, then there are ways in which the structures can be modified. For example, there are bird diverters that are placed on transmission lines, as well as the way for example, the turbines are placed their locations, for example, for the wind farms. So there are particular ways in which this can be mitigated. For the case of aeroplanes, this one we don't have, it's not a major issue, but it all starts also with because most of this would happen during the takeoff and landing, where the fields are managed. So, for example, making sure that there's no things that can attract vultures and other birds close to those airfields. So mostly this would happen when they are landing or the aeroplanes are landing or taking off. Thank you.
Can I do a plug-in right now and there, because I think it's incredibly important to mention that the location of the airports, and we are not necessarily related to vultures right now, but there's a big campaign going on right now trying to stop the Montijo airport in Lisbon, the second airport in Lisbon, that is being proposed by the president in the very most important place of that flyway. We are in a massive campaign. So for those of you who can help us join our conversation on Twitter and Facebook, we want the president of Portugal to stop the construction of the new airport in Lisbon that is being proposed in the Tagus estuary. That is the most important part of that flyway. It would be completely destroying that wetland and the sustainability of that flyway. Sorry, plug in because of airports. Let's go back to vultures.
Thank you, Patricia. Okay, we've had a question come in asking, what are some of the negative consequences of leaving carcasses unprocessed in a habitat devoid of vultures?
A good question and a challenging one to answer with complete certainty. So we know that when you lose your vultures, the carcasses are there for longer, and we know that the contact between the other scavengers, dogs, rats, or all kinds of things, may be very much increased. So the potential is there for the spread of diseases among the other scavengers, and certain diseases actually are, may reside in the carcasses themselves. There is evidence that there has been an enormous increase in rabies in the Indian subcontinent as a result of the loss of vultures. And the way that is believed to work is that the lack of vultures has meant there's been much more food available for feral dogs, which have therefore increased their populations, and this leads to more transmission of rabies from the dogs, among the dogs, and then to people. And the costs of this are enormous, and clearly in direct loss of life, but the economic costs of going to the doctor if you've been bitten, and with greater fear of rabies and more bites and so on, are very great. So the cost of just that impact was estimated to run into billions. It is a difficult one to prove because there are so many factors that affect disease transmission, and some of the figures can be disputed, and whether there are other diseases also. It seems rather likely to most of us, I think, that other diseases would be transmitted less when there are vultures around cleaning up the carcasses. A little bit difficult to prove, but and we're talking both human and livestock diseases. You can also presumably have contamination of water supplies where rotting carcasses are polluting standing and flowing water. And so there's quite a range of potential problems caused by the loss of vultures, and probably at huge economic and human cost, but lots more work is worth doing on that topic.
Thank you, Roger. I'm just going to share Joseph's second slide because we've had a question just come in about this from Lisa. So this is for you, Joseph, and anybody else that wants to comment on it. It seems that this issue of using vulture parts for belief-based use is now more than relevant in the midst of the pandemic in terms of educating the public on the dangers of consuming or coming into contact with certain wild species. If any of the panelists could comment on current efforts to educate people and or to impose some restrictions at markets, etc.
Well, yeah, personally in Nigeria, we have been trying to ride on the situation, as is usually said, that we should not lose the opportunity. We should not lose lessons learned from any crisis. We should not waste any crisis. We have been trying to use this to create awareness, especially during the International Vulture Day, Awareness Day that we held in the first Saturday of September. We used the opportunity to create awareness on vultures and the parts they played, just like Roger's rightly pointed out, how they help to save the human population from pandemics, because if they are not, if we don't have them in the ecosystem, then other facultative scavengers like rats and dogs, which you agree with me are closer to the human population, will go in there and will bring everything, the bacterium spores, directly to the human population. So we've used that opportunity to create more awareness, especially with the pandemic around us. So we'll rode on that wave to ensure that people are aware of it, and we'll continue to do that as well.
Thank you very much, Joseph. Okay, we've got lots of questions. Please do keep them coming. We've had a question here, another one from Lisa, asking, do vultures tend to migrate far beyond their home or seasonal feeding ranges?
I can respond to that. What we do find is vultures do cover large distances, especially immature birds. They do cover large distance, even within a space of 1 day. Vultures are known to cover even distances greater than 500 kilometers. And then we tend to have the adult birds that are breeding, sort of tending to their territories. So yes, they are known to cover large distances. That's why there's this need to have these large tracts of land, and also going even into transboundary vulture conservation work in respect of the large distances that they cover, particularly in search for food.
Brilliant, thank you, Fadzai. Okay, we've had a question from Omar here on what is the regulation of diclofenac in African countries, and is it still allowed for use in cattle?
Well, if I'll speak for Nigeria, it's still being allowed, and it's part of the project that we are working on. Part of the things we hope to achieve is to have an outright ban of it being used in Nigeria. So it's something that we are pushing through the legislation. We've done the field work, and we've seen that though it's on paper, it has the ban, but we want to make it official. So we are pushing that through the legislation. I don't know if any other African countries. I think Karaoke want to talk more on that.
Just to mention that, yes, I think diclofenac is still being imported in quite a number of countries. A survey we did some years back showed, a very quick survey showed that at least 15 countries were importing it. The issue of how widely it's used for livestock is what you cannot confirm, and how impactful it is on the vultures. But yes, it's still it's still imported in quite a number of countries.
I could just add a further point to that, looking more internationally. So we know, in fact, that diclofenac is toxic to vultures. We're also discovering, rather worryingly, that other drugs, they're called non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, several of the alternatives are toxic to vultures as well, but equally, there's at least one that isn't. So this has been an important part of what's been done in Asia to try to encourage the transfer to what we call the vulture safe one. And recently the Convention on Migratory Species passed a resolution which was noting this problem of non-steroidal anti-inflammatories poisoning vultures, and what they were urging was for bans in as many places as possible on the use of the ones that are considered, that have been shown to be toxic, to make sure that there is safety testing done on any new drugs of this sort that might be introduced, in the hope of removing the problem, before it, in many cases, before it appears. The final point is that we don't know at the moment that it's causing such a problem in Africa as it did in Asia. Presumably the vultures are equally vulnerable, but the way it's used may make it slightly less of a problem, but we can't possibly take the risk.
Okay, thank you all. There's a question here directed at Joseph. How readily are traditional healers engaging with the belief-based used projects? Are they suspicious of the project? Do they have their own organizational structure that can be approached, or do you have to approach individual healers, and are they sympathetic to the cause and happy to use alternatives?
I must say that we are happy to announce that they are actually sympathetic to the cause, because it's also helping their business. They've agreed with us that vultures are not as readily available as they used to. So they agree that they also have a problem. So for them to continue in their trade, that means they will have to get an alternative. So when we engage with them, yes, they have a structure. So when we engage with them, they were really happy to also look for that alternative. So we spoke with them about the possibility of some plant-based alternatives, and they were quite readily happy to do it. And that's why we want to scale this project to the next level, where we'll be able to get all the regions involved. One good thing is that they are well structured, and they have people that we can engage with, whom, if we are able to win them over, they will go down to pass this information to their members. So we are very positive about the acceptance of it.
Sarah, if I can also add, regarding traditional healers, in the case of Zimbabwe, one group, which is the largest association, had a membership of more than 40,000 traditional healers. And there are also other various associations. So this just speaks to the numbers of the people that are registered with these associations that are also at times also involved in looking for voucher parts. And again, as Joseph said, the issue of introducing plant-based substitutions is on the cards as a possibility to reduce the demand for vulture parts.
Great, thank you both. Okay, we've got a question here from Ashley. What is the typical rebound time frame for a population for the African species, assuming these threats are minimized? I understand these life cycles are longer, like American California condors, and it may take several generations to see a positive increase in population levels.
I could give you an idea for that based on experience in India or South Asia. I mean, the answer, the short answer, clearly where you're headed with the question is it's a long time and you cannot expect rapid results. So the diclofenac, the veterinary diclofenac ban in India came through in 2003. Of course, there was some time before the load in the ecosystem was really reduced a great deal. But it's only in the last couple of years that we've really been able to prove some turnaround in populations. So we are talking decades, and it's very likely to be similar in Africa. I mean, these birds, they do breed slowly, they're long-lived, and when adults are killed, which is what's happened, you know, the impact on the populations is severe, and it takes a long time to recover. So yep, we're in this for a long haul.
Thank you, Roger. We've got a question here from Guy, who asks if there's any evidence that migratory vultures, such as griffon vultures from a country such as Spain, settle in Africa, or do they return to Europe to breed?
Shall I take that one, being based in Europe? So yes, griffon vultures from Europe do indeed migrate through to West Africa. They don't appear to remain there. It may be possible that young ones might stay around longer, but no, they do come back. They haven't spread to Africa to breed. The interesting thing that might be happening is something the other way around, is that when the griffons come back from West Africa, they sometimes bring another species with them. So to Spanish and Moroccan bird watchers' great surprise, they occasionally find themselves looking at a Rupel's vulture among their griffon vultures. And this is presumably some sort of social thing, that the birds are a bit lost and get carried along with a group of griffons. We're wondering if the Rupels might actually start to breed in small numbers in Europe. I'm not sure of the very latest on that, but yes, you do get these interesting cases of vagrancy in answer to your question. Fairly rarely that they cause changes in breeding distribution, but it might happen.
Thank you very much, Roger. And I'm not sure who wants to take this question, but we've had a few questions coming in asking about the education programs that are done in African schools and what there is out there, if anybody wants to comment on that.
Thank you for that, Sarah. In our education and awareness program, so it's multi-layered because in the communities we work with, we are speaking to adults, we are speaking to the school children, we are speaking to government departments because the awareness has to go just beyond the school children. We produce different materials, posters, pamphlets, and even for the urban and the tech-savvy children, we also regularly put out our information via social media. So we share our information via Facebook, Twitter, and on our Facebook as well. In terms of the difference it makes to the children's attitude, it is quite amazing. The first perceptions you always get are that vultures are not, they're not cute, they're not charismatic. But through our engagements, you find, they start to appreciate the usefulness of vultures in the ecosystem, and even start to talk to their peers and to their parents. I've got one example from one of the areas I was working in Wange, where the parents actually approached me and said, we're actually getting this information vultures from from the children that have come across your information on vouchers. So from the children, it's also cascading into the rest of the communities where they come from as well. So it does make an impact to really reach out to the school children.
Yeah, if I'll add to that as well, the Nigerian Conservation Foundation, we have a very robust environmental education program, which we engage school children because we have school conservation clubs in different schools. So we use the opportunity to create awareness amongst the children, and especially we use environment days like the International Vulture Awareness Day, as I mentioned during my presentation, to talk about vultures and pushing it further to other to the public. We are also implementing currently an Egyptian vulture campaign sponsored by the EU Life project, where we've mounted billboards even along the airports, so that we'll be able to create awareness, because we try to leverage on all available resources to talk about all the vulture species that we have in the country. So we try to use all those avenues to create awareness. We've also done a mile for the vulture, for the Egyptian vulture, and we use that also to talk about other vulture species as well, to create awareness. So we have those awareness programs around creating an awareness of the public to the plight of the vulture species in the country and in Africa as a whole.
Just to add that such programs are also happening in quite a number of countries. So, for example, other countries which are implementing such education programs are like Zambia, Ethiopia, and other places in Kenya. So and it varies. The methods that are used varies from place to place, depending on. Also because Africa is quite diverse, so the methods do vary from place to place. Thank you.
Thank you all. Okay, we've got another question here from George. Asking, do vulture safe zones have any long-term legal status, or are they just voluntary agreements with landowners? Would the designation of a vulture safe zone preclude the establishment of a wind farm?
At the moment, at least in Zimbabwe, they do not have a legal standing. It's mostly coming from a gentleman's agreement with the landowners and the land managers. So we have not yet progressed to this point where they are actually legally recognized. So this is where we are. In terms of excluding such developments of a wind farm, maybe others will share their experiences. We really do not have problems with the establishment. There's not really wind farms really being established in Zimbabwe. But what would probably, if we had to say, give an answer to inclusion of such, would probably say that would be detrimental to the presence of vultures to have a wind farm in a vulture safe zone, because they are considered to be part of the infrastructure where birds can collide with the turbines. So wind farms would definitely not be part of a vulture safe zone.
Thank you, Fadzai. And following on from that, we've had a question from Solomon asking, what are the criteria for selecting vulture safe zones in Zimbabwe, and were there any baselines taken?
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Solomon, for that question. In terms of the baseline, we looked at places where we know that vultures breed, even if we did not have actual statistics of the numbers present, but we may have had historical information on the presence of breeding vultures. So that was one area that we looked at. We also looked at areas where we knew that landowners would be flexible with new ideas and implementing new practices. So our vulture safe zones that we have gone into so far are mostly privately owned and managed pieces of land, mainly because it's much easier to change land practices within a short period of time, because the owners are in control of what happens on those pieces of land. So those were the two main guiding components in terms of choosing vulture safe zones. And then of course the third one was that the willingness of those landowners to be part of the vulture safe zones. They had to be willing to be included in terms of the vulture safe zone work. Thank you.
Thank you. We've had a question here asking about the fact that we've had a bearded vulture in the Peak District in the UK recently for a few months now. I think it's actually just headed south. And the question is, do you see climate change having effects upon the range of vulture species worldwide in the future?
Yes, I think it's a tricky one to predict. There have been some studies on the impact of climate change on vulture distribution specifically, and particularly where you have vultures with relatively limited ranges. There's a species that only occurs in far southern Africa, the Cape vulture, which looks like it may be impacted particularly by climate change. The bearded vulture could be another one, in fact, because it's a mountain species, and so its natural distribution may alter. But it may be the case for all of them. So they're one of the groups that have been rather less studied in terms of impacts of climate change than others. But like almost everything else, it's extremely likely that they would be affected, but not always in ways we can predict at the moment.
Thank you, Roger. We've had a question here about West Africa, asking about what about the conservation efforts in West Africa? A large protected area such as the Comore National Park and the Ivory Coast seems to have a high density of 5 species of vultures. Also, Grebo-Kra National Park in Liberia may have a high number of vultures. So my question is, what type of efforts are being made to protect vultures in the West Africa area?
Maybe I can start. So I think to mention specifically about Comore National Park, since about 2017, there has been mostly been basic research to know the status of vultures. They are being led by our BirdLife partner in Germany in collaboration with one in Ivory Coast, mostly understanding which vultures and estimate their numbers and things like that, and what are the main threats. So most of the work that has been done specifically for Comore National Park has been mostly research to guide conservation efforts. But as regards the wider conservation efforts in West Africa, there has been a recent strategy developed for West Africa by our partners, but also there is now involvement, as has been mentioned by Joseph, taking very specific actions to address the specific threat of brief-based use. And of course, there's much more work needed to be done across the sub-region. And as we have mentioned, there's still work to be done. Most of the efforts for example, in Burkina Faso have been focused on raising awareness, documentaries, etc. And hopefully we can implement a wider strategy as we go. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We've got lots of questions still coming in. Please do keep them coming when we can. We've got a question related to vulture safe zones here, asking, I know that Zambia too has vulture safe zones through Birdwatch Zambia, but where else in Africa is this approach being used?
Thanks, Sarah. Yes, Birdwatch Zambia was certainly one of the first countries in Southern Africa to run with the vulture safe zone concepts. Some of the ideas we're implementing, we actually adopted them from our BirdLife partner in Zambia. Other areas where vulture safe zones are being implemented includes South Africa, BirdLife South Africa, and also other partners in South Africa also engaging in vulture safe zones. So quite a number of countries in the so Zambia, Zimbabwe, South Africa, a few of the countries involved in implementing vulture safe zones.
Thank you very much, Fadzai. And we've had a question about what are some of the ways to engage stakeholders such as landholders to ignite their interest and see vultures in a positive light?
Well, one of the ways we have done that has been having one-on-one meetings, sparking their interest in terms of how useful vultures are in their ecosystem. And a lot of the places where we've been working with the landowners are areas that are also adjacent to national parks and other areas that are important for wildlife. So they also begin to see vultures as part of the whole ecosystem that is also part of what's the word to use now? Part of interesting for tourists to come and experience when they come to Africa. So they're also seeing that as a positive in terms of having vultures around their areas. And they've also seen for themselves where when vultures descend on carcasses, easily and quickly getting rid of the carcasses and appreciating that role that they play when they get rid of carcasses. So it's also one from their own experiences of seeing vultures in action. They are living in areas where they see vultures on a regular basis, and also appreciating the value that they add at times to the tourism products that they have, that they do sell to tourists as well.
Thank you very much, Fadzai. And this is relating, I think, to part of Roger's presentation, saying the human-wildlife conflict and ivory poaching is not new. Is there a reason why vultures have declined so rapidly? Is poisoning increasing, or were vulture populations already vulnerable?
Well, I will kick off with that one, although my colleagues based in Africa may well be able to add to it. Yes, ivory poaching, certainly these things have been happening for a long time. These conflicts have been going on. Certainly, I think the sentinel poisoning, well, it's certainly been happening for a decade, but I think the ready availability of poisons and a huge range of them, and their shocking cheapness, particularly in relation to how dangerous they are to people, is, you know, and perhaps the increasingly regrettable awareness that, you know, this is something that one can do as an ivory poacher. It's just become a practice. That's probably where the changes have been, because, as you say, the ivory poaching has been going on for a very long time. But we certainly didn't used to hear about this kind of sentinel poisoning 20 years ago. So there's been a change in practices.
Did anybody want to add anything to that before we move on? Or
I just wanted to get one of the other questions that was there about a vulture-human conflict. Can you guys speak about that? I've never heard that.
It's not a phrase. Oh, wait a minute. Yes, perhaps it is a phrase. I believe, I'm not quite sure which type of conflict this might be, but a possibility is to do with vultures being perceived as predators of livestock. That's certainly been, the suggestion has been made in Europe, and, you know, some sheep farmers have objected to the introduction of vultures in certain areas where they had previously died out on that basis. In most cases, firstly, you find that, in fact, the majority of farmers, as far as I'm aware, are quite open to the presence of the vultures, recognizing that any losses are very, very low. And in fact, in many cases, when the evidence is actually looked at closely, it will be that the vultures actually have been eating a carcass, and it was assumed that they'd killed it, but in fact they probably hadn't. Vultures very occasionally are predators, but it's very rare. They really are not specialized for that lifestyle. So it's possible that that's what vulture-human conflict might be referring to. It's fortunately not a major problem. I suppose the other thing is just the point perhaps partly made in that cartoon that I showed of just some people don't like vultures. They find them disgusting and ugly and have filthy habits. And for some people, that's enough to persecute them. And that's a matter of education.
Yeah, changing perceptions.
Thanks both. We've got a question here, probably best for Joseph. What tribes in Nigeria among the native doctors are accepting plants as alternatives to vulture parts? He says, I ask because vultures among the Yoruba, who are the leading tribe in the use of vulture parts for belief-based use, have a rich cosmology and unique signature for solving a variety of problems. How do you verify the native doctors you educated have stopped using vulture parts? And what strategy is in place for the traders of vulture parts?
Well, I think all the tribes are susceptible because they all have There are various belief, various juju men, as we call them. But the ones that that a lot of people normally have is actually the Yoruba tribe. That's where we focus on, first of all, the southwestern part of the country, but also went to the northern part of the country, which are mostly Hausas. So we have Hausas also using vulture parts for almost the same thing. So that is why we want to do it across the country and upscale it so that we involve every of them across the country, not just the Yorubas or the Hausas, but you also have the Igbos, you also have the ones in the central part of the country as well.
Thank you very much, Joseph. We've got an interesting question here from Alexander, who asks, when large numbers of vultures are poisoned or killed from an area, does that leave an ecological hole that encourages vultures from other areas further afield to come in and plug the hole, or does the area stay empty of vultures?
I can have a go at that one. Well, vultures do disperse over large areas, and so to some extent the hole may be filled by wandering birds from neighbouring areas, but you know, it's important to realise, of course, that because they're such slow breeders, the hole won't rapidly be filled, you know, within a few years by new recruits to the population who found some vacant habitat, because it just won't, things won't happen that quickly. So you know, unfortunately, it's difficult to detect the precise causes of a major, you know, a 500+ vulture mortality incident, but it's rather unlikely that they will simply recover.
Sarah, if you can allow me to add to Roger's response. In one part of Zimbabwe, in the southeast lowveld, there was some data that was collected prior vulture breeding data, prior to a poisoning incident and after a poisoning incident where over 190 birds were killed. It was found that there was a reduction in the number of active nests in the following breeding season. So it appears that occupation of the vacuum does not happen immediately. It probably takes a good number of years before that number of active nests recovers to its previous full capacity or extent of occupancy. So it doesn't happen immediately. It probably takes a good number of years.
Thank you both. Okay, we've just got a few minutes of questions left, but we've had a few come in asking about the interest in vulture tourism, vulture restaurants and bird hides and alike. Is there much interest there, or do those tactics are they applicable to vulture conservation?
Yes, let me just make a few observations on that point. Yes, vulture restaurants, as they're often called, are being tried in various places. Quite a lot in South Africa, for example. They're also tried in parts of Europe and Asia too, and they can have different applications. I mean, in some cases, for example, in Cambodia, where there's also a very endangered population of vultures, the vulture restaurants are used as a way of monitoring populations. And in other places, they might be used as a way of ensuring the vultures actually have safe food in an area where food supplies may be contaminated. They do have some risks because sometimes, of course, if the controls are not right, you know, well, there's a range of problems that can arise. For example, well, most obviously the possibility that they could be given contaminated meat. But there are a few concerns about the sort of universal use of vulture safe zones. But I think with the right controls and the right considerations, they could be they certainly have a contribution to make.
Thank you very much. And we've had some really good questions today. I think we'll just close with hopefully what I think is going to be quite a nice easy one, which is simply, how many species of vulture are found in Africa?
11.
That's for you.
There are 11 species.
11 out of which how many are threatened?
Of which 8 are threatened.
Yeah. So yeah, we cannot afford to lose them, and we cannot afford to get more on the threat scale, or the closer to the threat area of the red list. So that's why we need your support. Okay, well, this has been an incredible conversation. I have responded to a couple of questions on typing. Great to have so many of you connected. Thank you so much for joining us. Sarah, I think we can put another slide on. And I have to say thank you so much for those of you who are already donating. We got a couple of donations in, and I got a couple of messages already, so thanks so much for that. Please do help us. We have an ongoing campaign in Africa to save our vultures. They play an incredibly important role, as you heard. We are doing everything we can with our African partnership. We just heard from Zimbabwe and Nigeria. We're working across Africa throughout. All of the BirdLife partners in Africa are vested on helping us ensure that we don't lose more vultures. So join our campaign, help us. As I said in one of the messages, it's not only about money, but it is about money, so we can actually mobilize our partners like Fadzai and Joseph and many others throughout the Africa partnership, so they can help us save these magnificent birds that have been so misunderstood, and they are truly the unsung heroes of the animal world. And do join us on our series. Our next webinar is going to be the 14th of October at 1:30 p.m. British time. It is going to be about the magic of migration. October is the month of the migration when birds are going back south. They came north in the spring and they're going south in the fall. So join us on the webinar. We will have BirdLife partners talking about the migration, and it will be the month of the migration. We will be celebrating together. So if you can go back just one second to the other slide, Sarah. Join the family, help us out. This is not, as many of you said, this is extraordinary information. Our webinar is being recorded, and we will be making it available online. So for those of you, your friends, your family, your colleagues all over the world, pass the link on. Let them learn about the extraordinary work of the BirdLife family, stopping the decline of our vultures, and get them to be part of the effort supporting our work. And for those of you who have not been on the other webinars before, all of them are available online. Go to the YouTube channel of BirdLife, and you'll find them there. And thanks again for joining us. It's lovely to see so many of you, friendly faces and some not friendly faces, or not new faces, I should say. We love having these conversations about the fantastic work that the BirdLife Partnership is doing, but also gain more friends for BirdLife and the work that we're doing across the world. So sorry, I misspoke about the dates. So the Global Bird Weekend is the 17th and 18th of October, and the weekend before that is World Migratory Bird Day, when we will be celebrating the migration. So all that week is all about migration. Join us in the webinar, and thanks so much for being here with us. And we will we'll look forward to being with you in October.